Szanowni Państwo, zastanawialiście się kiedyś, dlaczego Kościół katolicki od 60 lat przypomina często bardziej organizację charytatywną albo może jakiś większy NGOs? Otóż odpowiedź na to pytanie znajdziecie Państwo w znakomitej książce Religia człowieka autorstwa hiszpańskiego kapłana Arvalo Calderona, która to książka została niedawno wydana przez wydawnictwo De Regio, patrona naszego programu. Książka, która krytykuje antropocentryczne przesunięcie w chrześcijaństwie i Kościele po II Soborze Watykańskim II, jest niezbędną lekturą dla każdego, kto chciałby zrozumieć nie tylko łoża kryzysu Kościoła, ale również całej naszej zachodniej cywilizacji. Polecam bardzo serdecznie, dr Michał Krupa.
Hello, everybody. DR Global, the English language podcast of Poland's largest conservative weekly, Do Rzeczy. I am your host, Mike Krupa, and today is November 25th, 2025. Guys, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. It definitely helps the channel grow. If you feel you can contribute somewhat to our work, that'll also help. You'll find the description to buy me a coffee also in the description box. And remember, our sponsor is DeRegio Publishing House. You will find the link also in the description box. DeRegio has a wide variety of excellent books for our Polish language readers and listeners. The Christmas season is coming up, a great opportunity to get that special someone a beautiful Christmas present, a treat for the soul and for the mind. The great books at DeRegio will definitely fulfill the expectations of any sane, rational, and conservative reader here in Poland. So I definitely encourage you to check out DeRegio. And today we have another special guest all the way from the great US of A. Today we are hosting Andrew Day, who is the senior editor of the American Conservative magazine, actually the magazine about which I wrote my PhD about. And Andrew also has a PhD in political science from Northwest University, and you can follow him on X. We will also put the link to Andrew's X handle in our description box. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, and thanks so much for having me.
Of course. It's an honor, and we've had some already very interesting American voices in our first inaugural week of DR Global last week, including a member of, I think, the board of the American Conservative, Colonel Douglas McGregor, or as many of us just call him, Doug. We discussed foreign policy last week, and it's great to have you here today to discuss a lot of the internal turbulence that's occurring right now in the American conservative movement. So I think we should just basically start off with, I think, one of the most important pieces of news in the last couple of days in American conservative politics, and that was the resignation of Marjorie Taylor Greene. She announced in a X announcement, basically, and then she published an official statement that she will be resigning from her seat in the United States House of Representatives. She is representing, obviously, the state of Georgia. I just forgot which district exactly. She obviously has been one of the most stalwart critics of the so-called Israel First policy that has been propounded by a lot of people in and around Donald Trump, and which has sparked basically, along with Tucker Carlson's recent activity, a sort of civil war within the American conservative movement. But Andrew, I want to ask you I want to start off with a sort of a provocative question, because President Trump labeled Marjorie Taylor Greene as a traitor in the last couple of days and weeks. And it's interesting because we learned just a couple of days ago that the United States ambassador in Israel, Mike Huckabee, hosted an actual traitor in the U.S. embassy in Israel, which we only found out through the diligent reporting of, I believe it was the New York Times. So we're kind of in a weird situation as observers of American politics around the world, that a stalwart supporter of President Trump is being dumped as a traitor, forced to resign, basically. And we have an actual former traitor who's meeting it up and hitting it off with the American ambassador in Israel. I'm pretty sure to an American conservative eye, that also seems a bit odd, to say the least. What's your take?
It certainly is a bit odd, that particular juxtaposition. There's also another juxtaposition that people have commented on, which is that the same day, I believe, that Marjorie Taylor Greene announced her resignation, Trump had a very chummy, warm meeting with Zoran Mamdani, the mayor-elect of New York City, who is regarded by the MAGA movement as a very far-left socialist guy. He even identifies as a democratic socialist. Trump has called him a communist. He has called Trump a fascist. And it was very unusual to see Trump being willing to be so friendly toward Mamdani, even as he has been relentlessly attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, has been one of his most loyal supporters in Congress. She came in 2020. She was elected for the first time, and then in 2021, she took her seat. And that was not, the rise of MAGA year. Like that's when everything seemed kind of to be over, and she kind of kept the flame alive for the MAGA movement in some very dark times and throughout the Biden administration. Once Trump came back into office, she was, over the moon. She was extremely happy about that. But some tensions started to emerge. And I think because she has been principled beyond just her loyalty to Trump, she actually has a deeper kind of ideological commitment to the MAGA movement that a lot of people don't have. And so sometimes when Trump and her perception deviated from MAGA ideology, MAGA principles, they would butt heads a little bit, even if she was often hesitant to call him out directly. So they butted heads over Iran. She was opposed to striking Iran. They've butted heads a bit over immigration. She wants to phase out the H-1B visa system. That's a worker visa for what are called high skilled workers, but a lot of conservatives have questioned whether these workers are actually high skilled and whether Americans can't do those jobs themselves. And of course, and this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, they had a difference of opinion about the Epstein files. She really wanted to get transparency on the Epstein files to get those released. I don't think that she thinks the release of those Epstein files is going to implicate Trump or reveal that any criminality on his part, but he, for whatever reason, was basically trying to sweep that under the rug, right? And a couple ironies of this is one, after he called her out, labeled her a traitor, and all of this, he eventually relented and said, "Okay, people in the House representatives, they can vote to release the Epstein files. I won't attack them." And there are some other things that I find a little strange about this, like the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't decide to just not run for re-election. That would have seemed the more obvious thing to do if Trump is withholding his endorsement and making it difficult for her to get reelected. She can just announce that she's going to serve the rest of her term, but she's not going to run for re-election. And instead, she decided to resign beginning in January of the coming year, which I find a little odd. But overall, my impression is that she's been a good MAGA conservative, a very principled person. I think she may have had some political ambitions beyond being a House representative. I think that might have played into this a little bit. Trump has said that he informed her that she had no chance of becoming senator or governor, and so she shouldn't try. Some people think that she's actually a bit more of a political animal, more politically ambitious than she lets on. So that might be part of this, but I think the main thing is that she was principled and that Trump, being a political operator, sometimes has to make compromises or sometimes has his own political calculations that he's pursuing, and she didn't go along with them.
For some of our viewers who maybe aren't familiar with systematic reading of AMCON, or the American Conservative Magazine, for which Andrew represents, is one of the oldest, the most powerful conservative voices on the American right. It was set up in 2002 by the great Pat Buchanan, who is the leader of what's sometimes called paleoconservatism in political science terminology. And in a way, we can say that the American conservative paved the way for Donald Trump, in the sense that a lot of the issues that AMCON was pushing in the early 2000s, non-interventionism in foreign policy, economic nationalism, conservative social policy. Those are all things that sort of Trump gathered up in 2015, 2016, and built his campaign upon. He even actually made positive references to Pat Buchanan on several occasions. But the reason I'm sort of referencing the history of the magazine is one of the, I guess, crucial issues that always sort of made AMCON unique was your stance on the Israel issue and the issue of the Israel lobby, which is a very interesting issue for a lot of Polish observers of the American political scene, because we also have our sort of frictions with the international Zionist or Jewish lobby, if you want to call it that. And my question in this regard is, we're seeing finally a long overdue war, in my opinion, on the American right over Israel, over the influence of the Israel lobby. What country should be put first, over Christian Zionism? And I think there are two sides right now that really can't be reconciled. And what's your sense? Is this war already a foregone conclusion that America first will win out, or do you foresee some internal forces that'll push back and do what they did to Pat Buchanan in the 90s, basically marginalize this group of American firsters and keep the Republican Party and American conservatism within the general pro-Israeli camp?
I definitely don't think it's a sure thing that the America First kind of paleo-conservative position is going to win. And I should add that the Marjorie Taylor Greene resignation and the whole battle over her is relevant to this. That is one battle within this larger civil war that you've described very well. The reason, so I think that this is what, in political science terms, we could call a kind of high agency moment rather than a structurally determined one. It's not clear at all who's going to win this debate, this battle, this war. One reason that the pro Israel side, even though it seems like their side is becoming less popular, one reason they might win is because they have they have a kind of disproportionate influence, right? And they clearly perceive that support for Israel is dropping in American public opinion and in Western public opinion broadly. And so they're making a counterattack, right? So pro Israel billionaires are taking over TikTok. They're taking over CBS. They're making Barry Weiss the editor in chief of CBS, even though she's totally unqualified for that role, except for her one qualification that she's going to reliably ensure pro Israel coverage. And that's a major power. That's major influence that they're currently exercising. And so they might end up winning this battle. But it is true that the America First side has the momentum. One reason for that is that this is a generational divide. Younger conservatives, younger Americans broadly, are becoming more wary of Israel, more skeptical and critical. Half of Republican voters under 50 have an unfavorable view of Israel, according to a poll from, I believe, August. And I don't think any recent polls have, contradicted that one. That's huge. I bet if you got a more fine-grained look at the general cohorts on the Republican side, you would see that Zoomers, a majority, probably a strong majority of Zoomer conservatives, have an unfavorable view of Israel. So this is a growing movement. But of course, older people are the ones who are in charge currently. So the Republican establishment is still extremely in favor of Israel, in favor of giving lavish, unconditional support to Israel. One of the biggest battles that we need to keep an eye on is this debate about the new memorandum of understanding. How much money is Israel going to get going forward? Usually they get a kind of 10-year allotment, and we'll say, okay, we're going to give them $3.8 billion every year in military assistance. Israel right now is trying to get a 20-year one after the current one expires. They said they're going to put a little America First twist on that. Maybe it's not going to be as direct military support. I mean, we'll wait and see. But my read on that is Israel thinks that maybe they can't expect this special relationship, so-called, to last going forward. Maybe America's unconditional support is not going to last for much longer, not a decade longer. And so they need to lock down as much support as they can right now for 20 years. A 20-year commitment would be great for them. And then they'll eventually detox from American security assistance. But they don't want to go cold turkey. And that's kind of the dilemma that they're in now. And as far as just looking at American domestic politics and how the Israel issue affects the American right, I mean, this is becoming politically untenable, I think, for the American right wing, because we have the loudest pro-Israel voices and we have the loudest anti-Israel voices. And I don't know how long such a coalition can stay together. Republican voters in general, they don't vote on foreign policy. They don't vote on Israel. They vote on affordability. They vote on immigration. But nevertheless, we can't just set aside this Israel issue, I don't think, because it's kind of fundamental to America First. It's fundamental to the logic of the movement that Trump helped inaugurate, or helped popularize, at least, if we think that Pat Buchanan perhaps inaugurated it. Because younger voters especially are asking themselves, well, why is there an exception in America First for Israel? That doesn't make any sense. It's not America first to give unconditional support to this country that sometimes acts in a way that we don't like, that's not in the US interest. For example, when they bombed Iran while we were trying to get a nuclear deal with Iran, they did that ahead of a weekend of negotiations between the US
Mhm.
and Iran. We didn't like that. I think Trump didn't like that, even though a lot of people think that he greenlit that attack. So this is a debate that conservatives in America need to have. I don't think it's clear how it's going to shake out. I've argued that J.D. Vance would be an effective kind of transitional figure as the Republican Party
Mhm.
moves from being pro-Israel, Christian Zionist, and so forth, to this position that just treats Israel as kind of a normal foreign country that we don't necessarily support unconditionally, that we only support when there's a clear U.S. interest to do so. He is popular among advocates of foreign policy realism and restraint. That's the faction of the right that tends to be very skeptical of Israel. At the same time, he has a history of being pro Israel. So I think the pro
Mhm.
Israel Republicans could kind of trust him. But as I recently found out, the pro Israel Republicans don't agree, because I wrote an article making this exact same argument in the American Conservative, and the backlash from pro Israel conservatives was intense. They clearly do not like Vance, do not want him to be the Republican nominee. They are probably going to be all in for Ted Cruz or maybe Marco Rubio.
Mhm.
I think that that would be disastrous for the Republican Party. That would be a return to the kind of George W. Bush foreign policy, a return to a Republican Party that didn't actually care that much about immigration, but only pretended to get votes. And so I hope we're not going to go that direction.
Are you getting the sort of sense that the way that the vice president positions himself currently is sort of reminiscent of Ronald Reagan? Now, I know Ronald Reagan is revered on the American right, but sometimes for all the wrong reasons. But in this regard, I would say he should be remembered for a lot of good reasons in this example of Israel, because if you look at Reagan's, legacy and his achievements on Israel, he wasn't anti-Israel per se, but at many critical junctures, he told the Israelis to pound sand. And I'm getting the sense that Vance is positioning himself in the same way, in the sense that he's not going to be an outright enemy of Israel or even skeptical in the sense of Pat Buchanan. Like, he won't say, Capitol Hill is Israeli occupied territory, probably won't go that far, but he will be willing to make very critical statements and be willing to say no to the Israelis, like Reagan did on many, many occasions, and even come out publicly and criticize the Israelis should the need arise. Are you getting the same sense on Vance currently?
Yes, I am. And you say that he's not going to come out and say that Capitol Hill is Israeli occupied territory, as Pat Buchanan did. I think also Vice President Vance doesn't think that, or he doesn't see things the same way. He's genuinely not of this kind of America First persuasion when it comes to the Israel issue. Um, and in some ways, that's why I think he would be a good transitional figure, as I just described. And yeah, I do see some similarities, as you've laid out, between him and Ronald Reagan, or between Ronald Reagan and what we can imagine a J.D. Vance presidency would kind of look like, in the sense that he's occasionally willing to tell Israel to back off, or that's not in our interest, so don't do that, or we're not going to support you anymore if you continue to do that. Actually, there was a recent episode where he was visiting Israel. And oftentimes, when U.S. senior officials, White House senior officials visit Israel, the Israelis, for some reason, look for an opportunity to kind of humiliate the visiting White House official. So when Marco Rubio visited recently, in the middle of his trip, I think something like 7 or 8 Israeli officials leaked to Axios that the Israeli government had given advance warning to the United States that they were going to strike Doha, which was a major diplomatic crisis. And their leaking that to Axios worsened the diplomatic crisis for America. Rubio was supposed to be heading to Doha after his Israel trip. It was extremely awkward, and it was intentionally designed to be awkward for Rubio as a kind of power move by the Israeli government. They did that when Vance was recently in Israel as well. They had this vote. It was called a symbolic vote. I don't know how true it is that it was just symbolic, but a vote announcing an intention to annex the West Bank, the Palestinian occupied territories. Um, They made that vote, I think, on JD Vance's last day of the trip, so he had to answer questions about it on the way out. Some context: the U.S. officially opposes annexation of the West Bank and supports a two-state solution, which annexing the West Bank would make impossible. So this is a vote by Israel that is against the wishes of its patron, kind of showing, okay, the patron, the United States, just because it's powerful and gives us all of our military assistance and stuff, doesn't mean they can control us. We can handle the Palestine issue the way that we want to. JD Vance was asked about it, and he gave a very firm statement, I thought. He basically said that was stupid. You shouldn't have done that. I heard it was symbolic. I hope it was symbolic, but if it was still stupid, and it's not in the interest of the United States. He was very firm, as I say, in his response. I thought that that was a very good sign. He also, on that trip, somewhat controversially, didn't visit the Wailing Wall and wear a kippah, which is, or sometimes called a yarmulke, which is what American officials normally do on such a trip, but which has become kind of controversial among some conservatives in America. I don't know exactly what his reasoning was for not doing that. He visited a Christian church instead, but some people saw it as a kind of symbolic way of saying, we're not going to do whatever you want anymore. There's a kind of a new dynamic here in our relationship. I think a lot of this is kind of a general tension that has emerged between the Trump administration and the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's been there really since Trump's first term, but certainly since his uh, you know return to the White House earlier this year. And I think it really worsened with the Doha strike that I mentioned, that was targeting Hamas leaders, that actually didn't end up killing the targeted Hamas leaders. And that really upset Qatar, because the Trump administration, for various reasons, and President Donald Trump himself, really valued the relations that they have with these Arab Gulf states. Partly that's for political reasons, as they're trying to win this general Cold War II with China. Partly it's for economic reasons. Partly it's for energy resource reasons. They want to be on good terms with the Gulf states. And this really upset Qatar, and it kind of freaked out all the Arab countries in the region, actually. And so the U.S. was quite upset about it. And I think we've seen a kind of different tenor in the way that they talk about Israel and approach Israel. I don't know how long it will last. Obviously, the Trump administration was able to get the ceasefire. JD Vance has been one of the appointed babysitters who has to go to Israel every now and then and make sure that Netanyahu doesn't just straight up, destroy the ceasefire. But at this point, we can only talk about the ceasefire with kind of scare quotes around it, right? I mean, it's not just a tenuous ceasefire at this point. It kind of just doesn't exist. Like, there's been a de-escalation of violence, certainly in the Gaza war. And I don't think Hamas has, in any confirmed way, straight up violated the ceasefire, although I might be wrong about that. Israel is routinely violating the ceasefire, and it's seen as kind of enforcing the ceasefire, or it's making the ceasefire more fragile. Really, I think what's happening is Trump got a ceasefire he cared a lot about, and Israel doesn't care nearly as much about it as he does. So we're heading towards some general break in the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's just too many geopolitical tensions that have arisen. And as I mentioned earlier, American public opinion is turning sour on Israel in a very rapid and dramatic fashion, especially when you look at younger voters.
I'll wrap the Israel issue up with this final question, because I think we have to touch upon it. A lot of people are saying the whole Epstein case makes Trump basically a lame duck from now on, because he fouled up so bad. Basically, at the last second, as you mentioned in the beginning of our discussion, he allowed the Republicans, to vote for the release of the Epstein files. Although there are those caveats where they say that since there are ongoing investigations, the ones that apparently would implicate Trump are the ones that will be top secret, and they won't be, made public to the American people. So my question to you is, in terms of the midterms next year, what would Trump have to do to take this Epstein stain off himself? Because this is one of those things where not only did he promise, and all his, a lot of his officials promised before the election that they get this done, but the MAGA populace does not have a short memory on this, I don't think. And when it comes to molesting, young girls, they won't forget so easily, no matter the rhetorical tricks that might be played by Trump himself or the White House between now and the midterms.
I think that what the Trump administration needs to do and what President Donald Trump needs to do in order to put this controversy behind him is to release the Epstein files, to actually go full transparency on the Epstein files. I am pretty sure, I'm virtually certain that there is embarrassing stuff in there on Trump, but I think that the evidence so far suggests that Trump didn't actually participate in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. I mean, we already know that President Trump was friends with Jeffrey Epstein decades ago, before Epstein actually was tried and convicted of sex crimes, right? No one is unaware of that fact. That's been on the public record for a long time. And people can kind of imagine that these two New York City billionaires had a somewhat caddish and misogynistic approach to women. They were womanizers. That's not going to be a surprise to anyone. I'm sure some of the stuff is going to be embarrassing. But as I said, I don't think it's going to implicate Trump criminally. I mean, the stuff that's been released so far, the House Democrats selectively released some emails that they got a hold of, and then the House Republicans released like many thousands of more. The Democrats released emails that were supposed to look bad for Trump, but I don't think they actually looked that bad for Trump. So, for example, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell would be talking about whether Trump knew about the girls, whatever that means. That's how they're referring to it. And Jeffrey Epstein would tell Maxwell, of course, Trump knew about the girls. He asked Maxwell to stop. I guess he was talking to someone other than Maxwell in that particular email. That's not the kind of thing that you would say, and that's not the way that you would talk about it if Trump was actually directly involved in these sex crimes against these young girls, right? You wouldn't say, yeah, Trump knew about the girls. The proof that he knew about the girls is that he told Maxwell to stop. It actually sounds like Trump maybe had knowledge of crimes and should have reported it at the time, but didn't condone it, right? Like that's what it seems like to me. And I think that at this point, it's clear to me that the cover up, and I don't think it can be denied that the Department of Justice and the FBI at Trump's direction have been covering up the Jeffrey Epstein situation. At this point, I don't think it can be denied that the cover up is more politically damaging than just coming clean and letting the chips fall where they may. I imagine President Trump is also thinking about other kind of billionaire donors and friends and acquaintances who would also be embarrassed by the full release of the Epstein files. Democrats and Republicans and non-political people. Jeffrey Epstein was extremely well connected. He also, it should be said, was a master manipulator who lied often, routinely. So there may be instances in which in an email he refers to having met someone and he's lying. That's a real possibility. And I can understand that there's a little bit of ethical ambiguity about that, about saying, well, do we really want to release all these emails because it seems like some people are going to be, unfairly under suspicion after we do so. But I think at this point, it's in the public interest. The American people are clearly interested in the story and unsatisfied with the way that it's been handled, including by the Trump administration. I think they should just release the files, let the chips fall where they may. If people are named in the files and want to clear their name, they can find a way to do so to establish a credible alibi. And then we can finally put this whole sordid episode behind us.
Yeah, fully agree. Well, we'll see how that turns out because it's definitely it's sort of a Watergate redux in many ways. They talk about it's the cover up that gets you killed. So we'll see how that goes. But going to another flashpoint, Andrew, you have to explain to me and our audience what's up with Venezuela, because I'm personally of the belief that Trump would really be dumb if he were to start another war before the midterms. I mean, there have been suggestions that, the president can try and persuade Maduro to step down. I've heard suggestions that, they will do a surgical strike whereby, they just drop a bomb on his presidential palace, they take him out, and then the Venezuelan populace takes over and it's a clean sweep, so to say. But I'm still, there's so many questions, so many question marks. Maduro has probably prepared himself for many contingencies also. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, Venezuela has the first or second largest military in South America, despite the fact that it might not be the most modern military, but still it's got combat capacity. What's your take on where this situation will evolve in the next few days, weeks, and months? Because just to remind our viewers, today is November 25th, and I did hear some rumblings that apparently the president said he's going to be speaking to Maduro apparently sometime soon. What's your take?
So I'm not an expert on the issue of Venezuela, and I think that's okay because I think the Venezuela experts are kind of equally mystified about what's going on. I don't think anyone fully knows what Trump and the Trump administration are up to. As you mentioned, there has been some signals in recent days that the Trump administration would be willing to talk to Maduro. So that's good. That suggests that this whole military buildup in the Caribbean has been just a show of force intended to extract concessions and kind of get Maduro in a position the Trump administration wanted him to be in for talks, right? And that was always a possibility. Some people were looking at the immense military buildup with like military aircraft carriers and stuff heading to the Caribbean and saying, okay, there's no reason to do this if not for a planned military strike. I don't think that that's quite right. I think in order to make the threat credible, in order to make the psychological operation credible against Maduro, you have to make the threat of kinetic military action credible as well. So you have to actually put real military assets in the Caribbean, right? So I never ruled out that this was just a psychological operation. On the other hand, I'm not completely sure that that's all it is. And, a couple of things are weird about this. One, Maduro was compromising with what was negotiating, talking to, being basically concessive toward the Trump administration. Early on, Rick Grinnell, who currently heads the Kennedy Center, he's also acted as an envoy for Trump. A lot of people hoped that he was going to have some sort of senior national security position, but he ended up not getting one. He's very dovish on Venezuela, and it kind of seemed in the early days of the administration that Trump was going to let him kind of take the Venezuela
Mhm.
portfolio. Grinnell went, I believe he talked to Maduro personally. I'm pretty sure they had good talks, good negotiations. They actually established this twice weekly deportation flight from the United States to Venezuela that Maduro, by the way, continues to facilitate. So that's kind of aiding the Trump administration's immigration and deportation policies. Another thing that's weird about this is the Trump administration is framing this as a kind of anti-narco trafficking campaign, but Venezuela, one, isn't the source of virtually any fentanyl. And fentanyl is the drug that's a synthetic opioid that kills like tens of thousands of Americans a year. So when you're talking about the drug overdose, fatal overdose crisis, you're talking about fentanyl. And fentanyl and Venezuela are not related at all. Venezuela is not even an origin country for cocaine. Okay, that's
Yeah.
another drug that kills Americans, although not nearly as many as fentanyl does. So this whole drug war framing is clearly a pretext. It's something that is rhetorically useful because Trump's voters care a lot about the opioids crisis and they want someone to blame for it. And this is a way of kind of demonstrating strength and saying we're going to go after the people who are bringing fentanyl into this country, but it's a pretext. They're lying, basically. So I don't know where this is going, and I'm not sure that the Trump administration knows either. But if you want to understand the kind of factional politics behind the scenes, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, he is a big time Latin America hawk. He is himself of Cuban extraction. And going to war with Venezuela is like a passion project for him. So he's the driving force in the administration on this. Apparently, he also, he's gotten the support now of Stephen Miller, who's a top aide and counselor to Donald Trump, a trusted advisor. So Miller and Rubio are, you know, joined together and they're kind of moving things along in a hawkish direction. And I think that those two, certainly Rubio, do want to bring this all the way to a war with Venezuela. But President Donald Trump tends to have a kind of pro-restraint instinct that wins through at the end. So I think it could go either direction.
We might be seeing, possibly, who knows, first fire and fury regarding North Korea and then a summit with the great leader himself. So who knows, maybe we'll be seeing a summit between the American great leader and the Venezuelan great leader if Trump's restraint instincts remain intact. just towards the latter end of our program, Andrew, I'd like to get your impressions about Trump's immigration policy. I mean, there's been so much talk about it. It was one of the central issues back in 2016 and in 2024. I think there's a lot of confusion regarding what's working and what's not working, in the sense that I think the majority of Americans, for sure Republicans and independents and some maybe rational Democrats, believe that, the United States has enough immigrants, and that, we should prioritize American workers. I mean, Bernie Sanders was saying these things just a couple of years ago. And Ro Khanna is one of those Democrats who's bringing back that, working class, pro-working class tradition in the Democratic Party. But sometimes I'm getting the sense that despite the good intentions of, deporting criminals, reducing illegal immigration to the United States, for every good step that Trump makes in this regard, like deportations, although there have been some controversies, obviously, regarding who's being deported, but in general, they're happening. And on the other hand, he claims he wants to bring, 600,000 Chinese students to the United States. So I'd like to hear your opinion as an American about the successes and the failures of the last year, not just under a year, of Trump's immigration policy.
Well, Trump definitely got elected in large part because of immigration. Because during the Biden administration, there was a perception that there was chaos at the border, and the reality was there really was chaos at the border, with way too many immigrants streaming in for the duration of the Biden administration. So, inflation and also immigration were the main reasons that Trump got elected. And I think it has to be said that Trump's greatest success in his second term is closing the border. And I do think that that's the first thing that needs to be said about Trump's immigration policy, is that he successfully closed the border so illegal immigrants can no longer get in through Mexico. Right. So that's not a small thing. That's very important. That at least stops the problem from getting rapidly worse. Right. On the other hand, the Trump administration has kind of been a victim of its own success, because when it comes to deportations, it's easy to deport people if you just kind of find them near the southern border. A lot of Biden's deportations, for example, were just, turning away people who clearly shouldn't be here at the southern border. Of course, they let in a lot of people and just granted them asylum, or told them, okay, come back to your asylum hearing in like a year or something. But in some cases, whenever the political pressure was going too strong, they would turn people away at the border, and that would count as a deportation. But the Trump administration can't really do that anymore because people aren't coming through the border. So they have to rely on these interior deportations. And interior deportations are much more difficult. America, as I'm sure your audience is aware, is a huge country. And these illegal immigrants have come in and gone to every single corner of our country. And so identifying them, locating them, and getting them is just logistically, it's very difficult. So the deportation numbers for that reason lagged. For most of the term, I think those numbers have been lower than what we saw during Biden, certainly during Obama. And that's been a source of disappointment for some MAGA voters. One thing that the Trump administration has tried to do is have these like really flashy deportations where they'll like send people to El Salvador terrorism detention facility or something, just to increase the pressure on immigrants, first of all, not to come, and also for the ones who are here to self-deport. And there's been some actual success in that regard. There's been a lot of self-deportations under Trump. But nevertheless, the actual deportation numbers are lower. Um, the Trump administration was able to get Congress to pass this big, beautiful bill, which provided substantial resources for immigration enforcement. So we might see these numbers go up going forward. The lack of resources has been a big problem for our immigration system. It's just hard to get an immigrant after you find them through this process of like having an immigration court hearing, et cetera, so that you can deport them lawfully according to the U.S. legal code. So that's good. You can have more ICE agents. You can have more immigration lawyers, thanks to the funding provided in that big, beautiful bill. But a lot of American voters, moderates, centrists, who maybe were kind of okay with Trump and who were generally averse to immigration, they've seen some of these images of ICE, capturing people and deporting them, and they've been emotionally affected and kind of soured on Trump's immigration policies for that reason. As far as Trump's own inconsistencies, I think you can just kind of chalk that up to business pressure.
Mhm.
Businesses are, big businesses, the main driver of our immigration problem. They want illegal immigrants because they are very cheap labor, and they want legal immigrants because they're at least cheaper than the American workers would be, right? So they bring them in, like the tech industry likes to bring in workers from India to do coding and stuff that Americans can do probably better than the Indian immigrant. But Americans just expect a higher price. Similar with the illegal immigrants. Americans actually will do this work that they're performing, but they just have demand for a higher wage and a better, standard of working. Um, and big business, of course, is going to apply pressure to any Republican administration, to any Democratic administration as well. I do think that in some ways, people are being too hard on Trump. Like, for instance, he recently said that we need to bring in these South Koreans to teach Americans how to make microchips. And I don't
Mhm.
have any problem with that. It's true that our kind of industrial manufacturing know-how has kind of atrophied over the course of the last few decades. Microchips are extraordinarily difficult to make, and it's extraordinarily important that the United States be able to make them going forward. There's like geopolitical reasons that you want to have a viable chip industry and compete with China going forward, especially if we're going to see China go after Taiwan at some point in the near future, because Taiwan makes like almost 100% of high-end microchips, which are used in everyday consumer technological products, also in weaponry and everything in between. So I think that that's basically sensible to bring in foreign workers to train American workers how to do things. As far as why he wants to bring in 600,000 Chinese students, I think that that's a disastrous thing for him to say. And if our university system requires 600,000 new Chinese students, then we need to probably reform our university system.
Indeed. And just to top it off, because I think our audience would be interested about this because he's such a phenomenon. I actually wrote a piece about him also in the last edition of the Dozetsu Weekly magazine. But Zoran Mamdani, the new king of New York, the mayor of New York, or some say the caliph of New York, I'm getting, I'm starting to sense a bit that this might be another Obama moment in American history, in the sense that Mamdani might not only limit his ambitions to being mayor of New York, if you get my vibe. Do you think I'm too out there with this line of thinking, or do you think he does have the potential to, stir things up in the grand American scheme of things in terms of presidential elections?
Well, fortunately, from my perspective, that's not going to happen, and it can't happen because Mamdani isn't eligible to run for president because he was born in a foreign
Right, he
country
wasn't
to
born. Right,
non-U.S.
exactly.
parents. But he could run for a different office than New York City mayor. He just can't run for president, and that's probably very good because I agree with you that he is a singular talent who kind of brings to mind the political skill of Barack Obama. They're very similar in a way. They exude a kind of aura of positivity, and that's a very inspiring for some people. I think that the way the conservatives have reacted to Zoran Mamdani has been foolish and counterproductive. There's been an effort to paint, to emphasize that he's critical of Israel, that he's anti-Semitic, which is not true. I do not think that Zoran Mamdani is anti-Semitic. And that has been kind of a gift to him because during the mayoral election, he could just say, "Oh no, I'm not worried about Israel. I'm worried about New Yorkers, and I'll care about Jewish New Yorkers just like I'll care about every other kind of New Yorker, and that's who I want to represent. And so I'm not going to travel to Israel. I'm going to stay right here in New York and fix New York City's problems." I think that those moments were very beneficial for Mamdani. I think that younger voters in New York and across the country aren't resonating to the anti-Mamdani rhetoric that the Republicans decided to use, which basically focused on him being a Muslim, on him being anti-Semitic, which, as I said, I don't think is true. And what I wished that Republicans would have focused on is the fact that Mamdani is terrible on law and order issues. I mean, this guy wants to
Mhm.
basically replace police officers with social workers, right? New York City used to be much more dangerous than it is today. And it required Mayor Rudy Giuliani, to come in and kind of kick street criminals in the teeth, as he promised to do, and clean up the city and restore law and order, restore safety. I think that this is something that would have been more politically effective, because New Yorkers remember what it's like to live in a very dangerous city, because we did
Mhm.
see an increase in violence around at the time of the George Floyd protests and a period of time directly thereafter. Um, so they remember that, they don't wanna return to it, and I think it could have been more effective political messaging just on, that level. I also think it's just more important for New Yorkers, genuinely, that they have law and order in their city, and that they don't have a mayor who believes in these ridiculous left-wing ideas about how we need to address the root causes of crime, and when someone, sets someone on fire on a train platform, they're a victim in some way of their circumstances. Now, that's not what we need to do. My general right wing view, my right wing philosophy of law and order is that someone's head is getting bashed. And it's just a matter of whose head it is. And I think it should be the criminals' heads. And I think the bashers should be the police officers with police badges. Mamdani disagrees. And I think if he's able to implement his preferred policies, it's going to be a disaster for New Yorkers.
Well, it'll definitely be interesting to see how things develop in the Big Apple. There's certainly a lot of controversy around him. Well, that meeting with Trump was pretty interesting. Some say they had a secret deal between them, although I think that's a bit far-fetched to say the least, but definitely something to be watching. Ladies and gentlemen, on American Conservative, from an American Conservative, on American politics, from an American. Andrew, thank you once again for joining DR Global today, and hope to see you soon on our program. Thank you once again.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great time.